On today's episode, Calum Ritchie is next up on my 2023 NHL Draft Profiles. I'll break down whether he could be the pick at number 19, and I'll also get into my final season recap segment of the offseason. All that and plenty more right here on Locked On Blackhawks.
You're Locked On Blackhawks, your daily podcast on the Chicago Blackhawks. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, everyone? Welcome on in to another episode of Locked On Blackhawks, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today is Monday, June 19th. I'm your host, Jack Bushman. Check me out on Twitter at JackBushman2, or you could also go and follow my Strictly Blackhawks account at Talkin' Hockey for all the latest Blackhawks news and updates. And just a reminder that you could subscribe for free. You can follow along to the podcast for free. Make sure to go and do that real quick. It helps me out tremendously. I would greatly appreciate it. And also that way you can get the latest episode as soon as it becomes available each and every day. All right. Good afternoon, everyone. As always, thank you all for joining me on another episode of Locked On Blackhawks, your one-stop shop for all things Chicago Blackhawks. Thank you all for making the show your very first listen here to start off your week. I hope everyone out there had themselves a lovely weekend and enjoyed Father's Day. One last shout out to all the dads out there for everything they do. I always enjoy Father's Day weekend, spending some time with my dad, watching the United States Open. And for all my golf listeners out there, or my golf fans who are also Blackhawks fans as well listening to this, I'm sure you all enjoyed the end of that tournament as well. So hope everyone had a lovely weekend. Back to business here on Monday. And boy, oh boy, we are closing in on the 2023 NHL Draft, folks. Just a little over 1 week away until Connor Bedard is announced as the number 1 overall pick. Couldn't be any more excited. Counting down the days, almost into single digits here. And just a reminder, make sure to go and smash that like button down below. Go leave me a comment right now about how excited you are going to be when the Blackhawks call Connor Bedard's name with the first overall pick. And also let me know what your plans are for the draft. I believe I'm going to be at the draft party in Chicago, so I hope to see a lot of you listeners and supporters out there. It'd be really cool to have some fan interactions and all enjoy such a special day in the future of the Chicago Blackhawks altogether. So definitely looking forward to that. And with the NHL draft closing in, folks, I figured it would be a pretty good idea to start off today's show with my next 2023 NHL draft profile. And today I'll, of course, be covering 18-year-old forward prospect Calum Ritchie, who spent the past 2 seasons playing with the Oshawa Generals of the OHL, also played for Team Canada at the most recent U18 World Juniors. And just a reminder for all of you folks out there, if you want to get caught up on all of my 2023 NHL draft profiles, you can easily do that by clicking on the YouTube channel. Hit that subscribe button. It takes 2 seconds and doesn't cost you anything. You can find my 2023 NHL draft profiles playlist. Everything's all in there. I've already broken down a handful of prospects: Colby Barlow, Ryan Leonard, Matthew Wood, Andrew Crystal, Gabe Perreault, Gavin Brindley, Dalibor Dvorsky, Daniil Boot, and most recently until today, Riley Heidt, who I think is a very intriguing prospect. But getting into Calum Ritchie, this past season played in 59 games for the Oshawa Generals as an alternate captain. 59 points in those 59 games, exactly a point per game this season, 24 goals, 35 assists. And as I mentioned, played for Canada at the World Juniors, had 9 points in 7 games there. So a pretty solid showing for Calum Ritchie. And I think kind of the interesting thing, and maybe the first thing that stood out to me when, reading some things from scouts and draft experts and draft analysts, and then actually watching his tape and some of his highlights and all that good stuff. I read a lot of things about Calum Ritchie's playmaking and his vision and his on-ice IQ. And while I do think those last 2 things are pretty prevalent, I do think he thinks the game at a high level and has a good offensive skill set. I actually believe the goal scoring ability might be the thing that translates the best to the NHL level, in my opinion. I think he sneakily has one of the best shots in this year's draft class. And look, maybe that doesn't stand out for a guy who only had 24 goals in 59 games, but a lot of the goals that he did score, very impressive wrist shot, very powerful, often blew it by opposing goaltenders, has good accuracy, knows where to put a shot through a screen with the body in front, and picks top corner quite frequently. So I really liked how he was scoring his goals. I also thought he goes to the right places on the ice when he doesn't have the puck. So that goal scoring ability of his, I really think personally that's what's going to translate the best. That powerful wrist shot, I think, is what's going to help him be a good offensive player at the next level. And while the speed is a little bit of a concern, and that's where my worries about the playmaking come into things, he does, like I said, he does have good hockey sense. He does have good IQ and play recognition out there. But I think one reason, or a couple of reasons here, why his playmaking might be better at the junior level, and I think it's going to be at the pro level, is because he does have some really solid stick handling and some good size to go along with it. For a guy who's already 6'2" at 17, 18 years old, he knows how to use his size, and also he is very swift with the puck on his stick. And I think that's kind of made up for the lack of top end speed. Like when you watch Calum Ritchie's highlights, you don't see him lugging the mail into the offensive zone very much. And when he is creating, it's due to that hockey sense and his ability to dance around some defenders to get to the open areas of the ice. And I will say, when he does, do those nifty moves and draws the defender's attention, he uses his playmaking abilities to set up his teammates there. But all in all, I do have some concerns about with just that top end speed and the lack of that. And I think the stick handling has just kind of allowed for him to be a better playmaker so far in his career. So I do have concerns about how high of a ceiling he will have offensively at the NHL level, but there are still a lot of things to like about his game. It's just when we're talking about a very deep NHL draft, and this is a guy, look, who only averaged a point per game this season in the OHL. And while that's nothing to bat an eye at, and Calum Ritchie, I do think is going to be a first round pick, there are just some concerns on the offensive side of things and about for me personally, about how many points he could truly accrue in the NHL. But as I mentioned, there are some things to like for sure. He is already a very solid and well-known two-way player, and also is considered to be one of the better face-off men in this year's draft as well. So it sounds pretty certain like Calum Ritchie is going to be a center at the next level, which is very important. There's always those questions and those concerns. Feels pretty certain he's going to be playing down the middle. He's also already spent the last 2 years having kind of a big role on the power play and the penalty kill for the Oshawa Generals. He has a really good compete level. He goes out there and works hard and makes the most of every shift seemingly, and finds ways to chip in and contribute in many different ways. And I also started off this by saying he at 17 years old, already had a leadership role for the Oshawa Generals, wore the A for them this past season. So some of these intangibles and just being a responsible two-way player, I think that those are the things that make Calum Ritchie a very safe pick. So I do think there's low risk with taking him, but I also do worry about that ceiling as well. Getting into the rankings here, though, for the most part, seems like everyone is pretty certain that Calum Ritchie is going to be a first-round pick. Some people have him going inside the top 20. Others have him going a little bit later. Bob McKenzie and Craig Button are the highest on him, actually. They both had him ranked at 13. Ritchie was ranked 14th by Elite Prospects, 18th by Chris Peters, 23rd by the Daily Faceoff, 24th by McKean's Hockey, 26th by Dobber Prospects, and 29th by Sportsnet. So feels pretty likely that he's going to go in the first round. It's just about how long his wait is going to be. As far as kind of breaking down his strengths and his weaknesses, I think the powerful shot that he possesses, and I already said it, one of the sneakiest shots in the draft, I truly believe. I also think he has really great stick handling for a guy his size, and that shouldn't be considered. I don't know why it would be considered, but I don't think that should be forgotten about for a guy as big as he is and isn't quite as mobile as maybe you'd like him to be. Perhaps that stick handling, if he continues to get better there, and of course on his speed as well, he could be a very he could be a better offensive player than I'm giving him credit for right now at the next level. I also feel like he's a lock to be a center iceman, can play on the penalty kill, and is versatile and has a strong compete level in all aspects of the game. So a lot to like there. But as far as the weaknesses, that top end speed, I do worry because it just feels like it's always going to hinder his playmaking ability. And the way he plays the game, like I said, he creates a lot with his stick handling, and I just don't know how well that's going to work in a man's game. So that gives me some issues thinking about how his playmaking is going to translate to the next level. I quite honestly don't think he's as good as a playmaker as some of these analysts are giving him credit to be. But again, what do I know? I researched this guy for a day or two. These guys do this for their jobs. It's just my opinion here personally. And the offensive consistency is one thing I read from a couple of different people. Like, he'd go and have a real streaky stretch, but then there'd also be times where late in the game, he'd kind of get a little passive, and there'd just be some nights where maybe you'd like to see him be a little more assertive and more aggressive and take matters into his own hands. So as far as the overall consensus on Calum Ritchie, I do believe he is going to be a first-round pick. There's a lot to like, but I just don't think he has the offensive upside to take at number 19, and I don't think he fits what the Blackhawks want personally. So my prediction is he's going to be a late first-round pick. I think if he can figure out the skating, there is second-line upside, but I think he's probably going to be a third-line player that can play a role on the penalty kill and perhaps the second power play unit. And I don't think there's a lot of risk here with this pick. It's just kind of with what the Blackhawks are doing. I just don't see Calum Ritchie being the pick personally because of maybe a little bit of a capped upside. So it's going to be interesting to see where he winds up going. I feel like there's going to be a team out there probably in the late 20s who is a playoff contender that is fine with taking a guy who feels pretty surefire to be a bottom 6 NHLer at the very worst. I just don't think he's the pick for the Blackhawks at number 19. All right, there is my breakdown of Calum Ritchie from the Oshawa Generals. Coming up in just a minute here, got to get into my final season recap segment of the offseason. But first, I got to talk to you all about eBay Motors. And for a championship team, it's all about making sure every player is a perfect fit. And it's the same when it comes to your vehicle. Every part needs to fit just right. So the next time you need parts and accessories, make sure to head on over to eBay Motors, because with eBay Guaranteed Fit, you can be sure that every part fits right the first time around. Just add your ride to the My Garage feature and look for the green check mark to know the part will fit, or else you'll get your money back. Because just like in sports, confidence is the name of the game when you shop on eBay Motors. And with over 122 million parts to choose from, you'll be back in the game in no time. After all, it's easy to bring home a win when the right parts are guaranteed. So get the right parts, the right fit, and the right prices on ebaymotors.com. Let's ride. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. All right, we're back here on the Locked On Blackhawks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Real quick, before I get into segment 2, just a reminder, I am currently on the journey, I guess I should say, to get to 1,000 subscribers here on YouTube. If you're still watching at this point of the episode and aren't subscribed already, what are you doing? Do me a huge favor. It's going to cost you nothing. Go and hit that subscribe button. You'll be able to get all caught up on all of the latest Blackhawks news and updates. You'll get notified when the episode comes out each and every day. And also gets me closer to that goal. Hitting 1,000 subscribers would really mean a lot to me and would really help me out. So please go and do that real quick if you haven't done so already. I greatly appreciate all of your support. But getting into segment 2, as I've referenced a couple of times already, it's time to get into my final season recap segment here of the offseason. And it's a fun thing that I truly do enjoy doing year after year. And I hope all you followers out there enjoyed this segment as well. It's kind of a nice reminder after the season how all of these players fared this past year and kind of where they fit in the future, what's their status, and whether or not, we're thinking they could be potential pieces of this rebuild moving forward. Getting the honors for my final season recap segment here of the offseason is none other than Joey Anderson, who actually is turning 25 years old here today. So quick happy birthday out there to Joey Anderson. Of course, guest of the Locked On Blackhawks podcast. A very fun interview, very nice guy, and a very intriguing forward, I believe, for the Blackhawks here in the offseason. He is currently a restricted free agent, but after what he did in that short stint with the Blackhawks at the end of the season, I personally would be all hands on deck to bring Joey Anderson back and to give him another opportunity. But of course, he was part of that trade from the Toronto Maple Leafs that sent Sam Lafferty and Jake McCabe north of the border. Seemed kind of just like a throw-in at the time, but we've seen Kyle Davidson make a couple of solid little moves like that go a little bit under the radar at the time. But then after you see these guys in action a little bit, you're like, oh, that Kyle Davidson guy, he knew what he was doing. And it's kind of funny thinking how it all really started with Sam Lafferty. That was the first trade he made as, at the time, interim GM for the Chicago Blackhawks. Lafferty, of course, went on to seize the moment here in Chicago, and the Hawks ended up getting a second-round pick for him when it only cost them Alex Nylander to pry Lafferty away from the Penguins, and we all know how that has gone for Alex Nylander ever since that trade. He's played in a few NHL games, but I don't think anyone's very convinced that he's going to be a full-time NHLer. And then Sam Lafferty is part of the trade that brings Joey Anderson here to Chicago, and feels like, I'm not going to say he's going to be the next Sam Lafferty, but it feels like there's potentially something there now that he's getting this opportunity. And we, of course, saw similar things with Brandon Hagel in the past. Anders Bjork was someone who was picked up at the end of the year as well. Same with Austin Wagner. I like these types of moves that Kyle Davidson has been doing, just giving players like this another opportunity. And for the most part, it's been working out so far in the short term. But yeah, Joey Anderson wasn't really known by many Blackhawks fans or many folks, and didn't really know all that much about him when the Blackhawks acquired him. But like I said, he wound up kind of making the most of the opportunity there in the end. And I thought, like I said, it's going to be, I do believe that he's worthy of bringing back here in the offseason based on what he did in those final 24 games. He's also been around for the last couple of years, bounced around between 3 NHL clubs, was drafted in the 3rd round by the New Jersey Devils, a Minnesota Duluth boy, by the way. The Blackhawks seemingly have a ton of those guys for whatever reason, so he fit right in there. But actually played in 34 games for the New Jersey Devils in 2018-19, but ever since then, his NHL totals in terms of games had kind of been on a decline. He gets traded to the Toronto Maple Leafs, is up and down in the system there, and then winds up getting dealt to the Blackhawks and was up in the NHL for the end of the season until being reassigned to Rockford to join them for their postseason run. But getting into the numbers that Joey Anderson put up in his time with the Chicago Blackhawks, only 24 games, like I said, at the end of the season, was acquired right before the NHL trade deadline, but made the most of those 24 games for the most part. He only played in 14 games with the Maple Leafs before being traded. In his 24 games with the Blackhawks, he tallied 4 goals, 2 assists, and 6 points while playing on that third line with Jujhar Khaira and Boris Kachuk. He's had 4 goals a couple of times previously in his career. That's how many he had in 34 games during the 18-19 season with the Devils, and he had 4 in 18 games the next season with New Jersey. And kind of honestly, looking at his numbers early on in his career with the Devils, 4 goals in 18 games. I believe he added 2 assists there as well. I was kind of surprised that New Jersey kind of punted on him and didn't give him a bigger opportunity. I don't know what was going on in the organization at that point or anything, but just kind of surprised me that Joey Anderson put up some pretty decent numbers, but wound up being kind of just an AHL guy in his time with the Toronto Maple Leafs. And we'll see if, the Blackhawks bring him back, if he can prove that he can be a full-time NHLer for a full 82-game season. But those 6 points that he tallied was most since the 1920 season back with the Devils. No penalty minutes in 24 games, kind of interesting for Joey Anderson. And he actually doesn't have a penalty since 2019-20. And again, I don't really like talking about penalty minutes all that much here. There's just no way to think about it, but kind of an interesting stat there for Joey Anderson that he doesn't have a penalty minute in his last 40 NHL games. In terms of shooting percentage, he shot 14.3% this year, had 28 shots on goal in his 24 games played. And he's actually always been in the double digits in terms of shooting percentage throughout his NHL career, which again doesn't have that many games worth of action. But again, something just kind of notable there that Joey Anderson, for whatever reason, has found the back of the net at a pretty successful clip. In terms of his time on ice, played or averaged 12 minutes and 56 seconds with Chicago, much larger of a role than he had with Toronto, only averaged 9 minutes and 35 games in his 14 games with the team. So obviously the Blackhawks and their staff gave him a much greater opportunity, and he kind of took it and run with it. And that third line was really solid in those final 15, 20 games of the year for the Blackhawks. In terms of the analytics, 44.5 Corsi for percentage for Joey Anderson this season, was on the ice for 10 goals, 4 to 25 against. Pretty similar, honestly, analytical numbers to Boris Tkachuk and Jujhar Khaira. Was on the ice for, 25 goals against in 24 games, but the goaltenders were not very good when he was on the ice. 85.2 on ice save percentage, one of the worst that I've seen of any Blackhawks player. So didn't really get much help from his tendy. And he also started 66.3% of his zone starts in the defensive zone. So more of a defensive minded role in the bottom six. They just kind of surprised everyone with some offensive production along the way, but they were known for mucking it up, being grinders, being physical along the board, and being hard to play against. So not surprising to see that's where he had most of his starts. In terms of kind of like the breakdown for when he was acquired by the Blackhawks, I mentioned that happened right before the deadline. It was actually on February 27th. And in his last game with the Maple Leafs, funny enough, was against the Chicago Blackhawks less than 2 weeks prior to being traded. But he had no points in his first 5 games with the Hawks, but then went on a little bit of a roll. 5 points in a 5-game stretch from March 8th to March 16th, 3 goals and 1 assist there before only tallying 1 goal in the final 14 games of the season. And while it was such a short sample size, I will say 24 games, it's hard to get a very accurate judgment of what a player is, but still, that third line, I don't know if Jujhar Khaira is going to be coming back in terms of a numbers game, but outside of Philip Kurashev, I think out of all the Blackhawks RFAs, Joey Anderson, at least in the forward group, Joey Anderson is the one that I'd be wanting to bring back the most. Like 25 years old, he does have some NHL experience already under his belt, plays the game the right way. And look, like I said, I just thought he made the most of his opportunity and gave the Blackhawks no reason to not want to take another look at him. And they're in such a position right now where they can afford to do that. They can, they want to be spending money at this point as they have to reach the cap floor. So for multiple different reasons, I really do believe Joey Anderson is going to come back. And I was pretty pleased with what he did in those 24 games. And that's, what I kind of take into mind when I go into my final grades, or what were the expectations when the Blackhawks acquired Joey Anderson? There really weren't any. So for him to give us 6 points in 24 games and playing solid on the third line with Tkachuk and Khaira, arguably the Blackhawks' most effective line in those final 15, 20 games, I believe he's worthy of another opportunity. So taking everything into consideration, I'm going to give Joey Anderson a flat B for his performance in 24 games with the Hawks. I know it wasn't a big body of work, but still, considering the expectations, he certainly exceeded them in my book. Kind of interesting to see, though, that most of the voters out there gave him a C. 63% of the voters on YouTube said C, while 18% said B. And then on Twitter, 51% of the voters said C, while 30 said B. Those were the B was the next highest selected option. Blah. But I kind of thought more people were going to give Joey Anderson a B. So maybe I'm in the minority here. Maybe I'm a little too high on him. But regardless of what grade you feel like, I think for the most part, we would all be on the same page saying that Joey Anderson is worth another look for the Blackhawks, considering where they're at in the rebuild. All right, there you have it, folks. My final 2022-2023 season recap segment of the offseason. I hope everyone enjoyed all those season breakdowns right here on the Locked On Blackhawks podcast. Don't go anywhere, folks, because I still have to get into my weekly Mailbag Monday fan segment. All right, before I wrap up today's show, still got to get into our weekly Mailbag Monday fan segment here on the Locked On Blackhawks podcast. But real quick, before I do that, I want to let you all know I'm having a giveaway here coming up real soon. I'm going to be giving away some Blackhawks related items. I'm actually going to be having a post about it coming out on my Instagram channel. And one of the things you're going to have to do in order to win that giveaway is you're going to have to follow Locked On Blackhawks on Instagram. So go ahead and get that out of the way. There's only two things you need to do. You need to be subscribed to Locked On Blackhawks on YouTube, and you need to be following Locked On Blackhawks on Instagram. Send me a DM on Instagram just send me a screenshot showing that you're subscribed to the channel. And once I do reach 1,000 followers, I'm going to be having a giveaway, and I'll have several Blackhawks items and cool Blackhawks stuff that I'll let the lucky winner choose from. So make sure to go and do that real quick. I'm on the road to 1,000 subscribers. Go and smash that subscribe button if you haven't done so already. But getting into Mailbag Monday here, got a couple of really solid questions that I'm actually pretty stoked to answer. The first of which came from Joel Fendler, who asked, Jack, thanks for all the coverage on the draft prospects. Who are your favorites that you've covered, and who have you ruled out? So it's kind of tough to say that for sure. And don't worry, to everyone out there, I'm going to be having a final Blackhawks mock draft. I'm going to be breaking down more prospects. There's a lot more good draft stuff coming. And I'm going to be ranking all these guys in order once I go over a couple of more notable players. But the two that really stood out to me the most thus far have been Ryan Leonard and Ryan Leonard and I have it written down here somewhere now. Colby Barlow, right? Ryan Leonard and Colby Barlow are the two who have been the most impressive to me. I think, though, for Ryan Leonard, the Blackhawks would have to be trading up inside the top 10. I imagine he's probably going somewhere between 6 and 10, and I just don't know how likely of an option that is going to be for Chicago. So Ryan Leonard, sadly, might be out of the picture. But I do really like Colby Barlow as well, and that could be on the table perhaps if the Blackhawks trade up to number 11 with the Vancouver Canucks. I just doubt that Colby Barlow is going to be there at number 19. So if they're going to land one of those two guys that I personally like the most, they're going to have to make a trade. But as far as who I think could be available at number 19 that I like the most, I think Gabriel Perreault is the one that stands out to me. I'm hoping that he'll slide through those middle teens. Maybe the Hawks make a trade with Calgary or Pittsburgh in order to swoop him up, but he's someone that's really stood out to me thus far. I just broke down Riley Heidt, who I think is going to be available at number 19 if the Blackhawks stay home there. I really think he fits awfully well. And same with Matthew Wood. The kid's just a big-bodied, competitive goal scorer, did really impressive things with Connecticut this year. I think that's just a good, risky pick for the Blackhawks to take at number 19 if that's what they're trying to do. As far as guys I've ruled out, I've definitely ruled out Daniil Boot. I'm not in on Daniil Boot. I honestly wasn't all that excited by Dalibor Dvorsky. I know he's supposed to go a little bit earlier, and the Blackhawks would probably have to trade up to get him, but I wasn't all that impressed with his breakdown, and I'm not really sold on either Gavin Brindley or Andrew Crystal at number 19. I think those guys could be trade-up opportunities if they're still available late in the first round, but I wouldn't be taking them at number 19 personally. So for me, if the Blackhawks stay home at number 19, and ideally these guys are all available, I would say Gabe Perreault is my number 1, Riley Heidt would be number 2, and then number 3 would probably be Matthew Wood. Next question I wanted to answer comes from Rose Brentley, who emailed in the podcast and asked, what are your thoughts on Chelsea Dagger moving forward? Is it time to put that in retirement in your mind? Seems pretty obvious to me. Yeah, I'm probably on that side as well, and I've seen it talked about a bunch on Blackhawks Twitter recently. Yeah, it just feels like that. It would be right to stop using that song with the era officially coming to a close. There's no more players from that 2015 Stanley Cup team. Patrick Kane and Jonathan Toews are both gone. I think it would be a smart thing to do to also, I don't think it needs to be done. I'm pretty sure Blackhawks fans are aware this team is now going in a different direction, but just to signify that this is the turning of a new leaf and they're going into another chapter. I would personally there's not a song that sticks out to me. There are just so many ones that are used by multiple NHL clubs. I've seen some people say they should all have personal goal songs. I'm not opposed to that. There is something though out there for sure that'll get the fans rowdy like Chelsea Dagger did. They just got to find that right thing. But I do agree it's probably time to close the book on Chelsea Dagger. It was fun while it lasted, but quite honestly, I'm not going to lie, unless it was a big and meaningful goal, which have been few and far between for the Chicago Blackhawks, although it is easier to get excited about it when you're actually in attendance. But sometimes I just, I don't know how to feel about celebrating the Chelsea dagger anymore. It just feels weird, and it feels like it's been over 10 years at this point. Like it's probably been 15 years at this point. So I do agree. It is pretty obvious of a decision to me. I would like to see the Blackhawks, as sad as it would be for Chelsea Dagger to leave. I mean, it's like goes hand in hand with the United Center and the Chicago Blackhawks. But I do agree it's probably the best for the Blackhawks to be thinking about moving forward in a different era. Third and final question I'm going to get in here today comes from Patrick Hawk, who asked, does AA returning, Andreas Athanasiou returning, change anything with Domi coming back? Do you think they could both be Blackhawks next year? And one reason I did want to answer this question is because I believe, I don't exactly know who it was. Forget exactly which well-known hockey writer had a breakdown. It might have been Frank Saravalli in the Daily Faceoff, but there was a top 50 free agents list that recently came out. Ben Pope of the Chicago Sun-Times tweeted about it. Some of you may have seen, but said that Max Domi, the projection was to get I think it was 5 years by $4 million. And the Blackhawks would not, I don't believe they'd be willing to give out that type of term to Max Domi. And Ben Pope actually suggested he wondered if he'd be willing to take maybe a 2-year deal at $6 million, maybe 3 at the absolute most. But there's going to be two things that make it difficult to bring Max Domi back, and neither of them is going to be the Blackhawks' money. Like, they could absolutely fit Andreas Athanasiou and Max Domi into this lineup next year. They need to be spending that money to get to the salary cap floor. Certainly not out of the cards. What I will say, though, is this feels like a really good opportunity for Max Domi to cash in after proving himself with the Blackhawks, being a really good face-off man too, and having kind of an offensive, just a resurgence overall, showing he can be a second and third line offensive player while also doing the things that he's known to do as well, and being sandpaper-esque and tough to play against. But I do wonder if he's really going to cash in on this, and he's bounced around with a lot of clubs, right? I'm sure he'd like to have that security with signing a multi-year deal. And also, man, he's sniffed being close in the Stanley Cup playoffs in back-to-back years now. And I just wonder how much he really does want to come back to a rebuilding club here in Chicago, although he was very vocal about enjoying his time here and seemed to get along with Luke Richardson and seemed to be vibing with the city and enjoyed every second that he spent here. And it is going to be intriguing, obviously, with Connor Bedard now coming to town. But I just wonder if he's leaning towards going to an actual contender rather than a team that's in the rebuilding stage. But there is certainly the room for Andreas Athanasiou and Max Domi to both be with the Chicago Blackhawks next year. If I had to guess right now, I would say it's pretty unlikely. I think the security is something that he would enjoy at this point in time. And I also think he could probably get that from a team that's ready to win now, whereas the Chicago Blackhawks just aren't in that situation at this very point in time. All right, folks, I think that is going to wrap up Monday, June 19th episode of Locked On Blackhawks. As always, thank you all again for tuning into the show, and make sure to go and subscribe to the YouTube channel and to follow Locked On Blackhawks for 100% for free wherever you may be listening to your podcast. Make sure and go do that real quick. And that way you can get the latest episode as soon as it becomes available each and every day. Once again, as always, I'm your host, Jack Bushman. Find me out on Twitter at Jack Bushman2, or you could also go and check out my strictly Blackhawks account at Talkin' Hockey for all the latest Blackhawks news and updates. So until tomorrow's episode, that's going to do it here for the Locked On Blackhawks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.